Sophia had never liked the old house. She'd inherited it after her aunt's passing, but the place always felt wrong. The floorboards creaked in the night, shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, and the air was heavy with a stale scent that never quite went away. Her aunt had lived in the house for as long as Sophia could remember, but even as a child there was something unsettling about it. Still, Sophia had no choice. The house was hers now, and the bills weren't going to pay themselves. So after a few months of sorting through her aunt's belongings, Sophia decided to move in. The first night she didn't think much of the strange sounds, the occasional scuffling, the distant scratching at the walls. She chalked it up to old house noises, but as the days passed, things began to feel more deliberate. The noises grew louder, the temperature fluctuated wildly as if the house was breathing. Then, on the third night, Sophia heard it clearly, a faint scratching beneath the floorboards, followed by a whisper, "Help me." Sophia's blood ran cold. She wasn't sure what frightened her more, the fact that she had heard something those words or the fact that she was alone in the house. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she lay awake, staring at the shadows, her mind racing. The next morning she decided to investigate. The noise had seemed to come from the corner of the living room, beneath the old wooden floor. As she knelt down, running her fingers over the boards, she noticed something odd. One of the floorboards seemed slightly raised, as if something beneath was pressing against it. It was a small imperfection, but enough to catch her attention. She grabbed a crowbar from the garage and pried the board loose, heart racing as it groaned and popped free. Beneath it there was nothing but dirt and darkness, but something caught her eye, a faint glow, like a candle flickering in the deep earth. Without thinking, Sophia crawled into the hole, digging through the dirt with her hands until she reached the source of the light. It was an old, half-melted candle sitting atop a bed of strange symbols carved into the floor beneath her. The symbols were intricate, some resembling words she couldn't read, others looking like twisted, horrific shapes. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the candle. It was warm to the touch despite being buried for years. The flame flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows across the floor. That's when she noticed it. The whisper, "Thank you." Sophia froze. The voice wasn't from the candle. It was coming from her, from deep beneath the floor. Suddenly, the candle's flame flickered violently, casting strange, writhing shadows against the walls. The room seemed to shrink, the air growing thick and heavy as the temperature dropped. The symbols on the floor glowed with a sickly greenish hue. Then a hand, pale and thin, reached up from the hole in the ground, grasping at her wrist. Its fingers were cold as death, its skin stretched tight over brittle bones. It dragged her toward the hole with a speed and strength that didn't seem possible. Sophia screamed, her heart pounding in her chest as she kicked and clawed at the ground, but the hand was relentless, pulling her deeper into the earth. Desperate, she shoved the candle into the hole, praying it would stop whatever was dragging her down. The moment the candle touched the darkness, the house shuddered, the walls groaned, the floorboards rattled violently, as if the entire house were about to collapse. The hand tightened around her wrist, pulling her down farther until... Suddenly, everything stopped. The room was still. The whispering ceased. The house fell silent. Sophia lay there, trembling, half in the hole and half out, her wrist raw and burning from where the hand had gripped her. She managed to pull herself out, gasping for air, her heart still pounding in her chest. But when she looked down at the floor, the candle was gone, and the symbols on the ground had vanished as if they had never been there at all. But the silence was no comfort. The whispers returned that night, louder this time, like 1,000 voices crowding her thoughts, each one begging for help, begging for release. Sophia didn't sleep. Instead, she spent the night pacing the house, her eyes darting to every shadow, every corner, every creaking floorboard. The whispers followed her, growing louder with every step. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, she heard the scraping sound again, the same sound she'd heard before, coming from beneath the floorboards. She rushed to the living room, and this time, when she pried up the floorboard, she found something worse than she could have imagined. Beneath the board was not just dirt. There was a small, open space, a crawl space filled with bodies, dozens of them, all with empty, hollow eyes staring up at her. They were stacked in the hole, crammed together in a grotesque, twisted pile, as though something had been feeding off their life force for years. And in the center of the pile, there was an old, half-melted candle, flickering weakly in the dark. A figure stirred in the pile, a man. His skin was ashen, his features gaunt, but his eyes were wide and pleading. "Help! Me!" Sophia recoiled in horror, but before she could back away, the candle flared brightly, and the voices all screamed in unison, "You should never have touched it!" The floor began to shift beneath her, the walls seemed to close in, and from the darkness beneath the floor, pale hands reached up to grab her, dragging her toward the pit, pulling her into the darkness where those hollow eyes would soon stare up at her, begging for release. As her fingers scraped against the wood, her last thought was that the candle had been burning all along, waiting for her to find it, and now it was too late. The next morning, when the neighbors came to check on Sophia, they found the house eerily silent. The doors were locked and the windows were sealed tight, but no one could hear her screams. They say the house is still standing, silent, empty, but always with a faint glow beneath the floorboards where the candlelight flickers, waiting for someone else to find it.